My name is Ryan Quinn, and I'm going to be talking about open source. So, so what is open source? Open source is a social movement to empower end users and contribute to public knowledge by making source code available to anyone interested. Open source can be used for just about anything. My background is in technology, so my frame of reference for open source is going to be source code. So anytime I reference things like source code and things of that nature, that's why. But you can put things under open source like hardware designs are open source. There's a movement to write open source textbooks. Photos or art can be placed under open source licenses, although typically those are placed under Creative Commons licenses more often than some of the licenses I'll be talking about later. All right, so why open source? Why would we want to work with open source? From an individual perspective, it's fun, and it's a way to give back. It helps with exposure to working in development teams and contributing to larger projects. Professionally, it gives us access to projects we wouldn't normally get to work on every day and to build skills. Like not everyone gets to work on a kernel or something of that nature. For business, it's good advertising. It's a way to show off engineering skills. So some hallmarks of open source, like open collaboration. Is it not working? Yeah, I'm on like slide 5. Could be. All right, well, let's see. Okay. Okay, maybe I'm moving a little too fast for meat. Might be being a little glitchy on my end. All right, so open collaboration. We'll go a little bit slower this time. Yeah, open collaboration is defined as a group of loosely coordinated participants who create a product or service which they make available to contributors and non-contributors. Relies on egalitarianism, meritocracy, and self-organization. Some examples of well-known projects with open collaboration: Wikipedia, everyone can contribute and edit. The Linux kernel is probably the most famous open source software project. Reddit and Stack Overflow or any of the Stack Exchange sites are open collaboration. They're example of user-generated content. All right, wait for it to change, hopefully. This thing is not keeping up. So this 12-minute talk may turn to a 30-minute talk.
I think also if you can just, share your information verbally, we'll get it. And then, like Chris said, we'll share the slides.
Yeah, I can try that, and I'll try to remember all my notes. All right, let's see. Yeah, we could do that too. Because the slides are not that interesting, to be quite honest. Let's see, where is that? Nope. All right. Let me figure out where that is. All right, well, I'll keep moving, and we won't have the slides. So I'll explain them, and hopefully some people will be able to picture what I have here. All right, so one of the next hallmark is decentralization. So I have a slide, a little picture of a little star topology. It's a point with lots of stuff coming off of it that's labeled centralized. And then there's decentralized, which is a much more chaotic graph. It's got a couple points that some of them are connected, some of them are not. And in a decentralized system, which is how open source mostly works, there's not a singular point of authority. Participants work individually of each other. They work independently and have access to all the information. Like we talked about GitHub, and the tool GitHub is built around is Git. It's a decentralized version control system. And it's one of the main tools for enabling a decentralized structure. Definitely one of the most famous. Everyone has the entire tree to work with once they pull in any new changes. Next hallmark, being able to study, modify, build, and share. Thank you, Kimberly, for sharing your screen. This is one of the core tenets of open source software, or just open source in general. It enshrines the idea that people should be able to inspect products, improve products, and share the modifications with other people. At one point, freely sharing code was the dominant software model. No one thought money could be made selling software, so they sold hardware, and then the software was given away as a value add, as a way to make the hardware useful. Apple still has this model. We buy Apple hardware, and we get Mac OS plus other Apple programs for free. An early example of code sharing was Unix. Famously, the AT&T commercial Unix distribution contained a large amount of software written by the community. And in the end, there were only 6 files which were proprietary to AT&T. This is where the BSD operating systems came from. They took all the community contributions, compiled them, and then replaced the 6 proprietary files. A key aspect of open source, which gets overlooked, is being able to build the product or project. Being able to build a project means a person can get a carbon copy of the original by running a few commands. Some products will claim to be open source, but no one is able to build the product because some parts are missing. Licensed under permissive or copyleft license. This is one of the big things. Product or projects need to be made available under a license which grants the rights without discrimination against people. So let's talk about open source licenses. The first thing to know is that copyright is the basis for all licenses in some form or fashion. And the exception is public domain, which is the opposite of copyright. The difference between licenses is that the different licenses use copyright to pick which rights they choose to waive or grant to people using the project or product, and which stipulations are required for compliance. The vast majority of licenses also state the author is not liable for any damages. This is useful as a way to indemnify yourself from any damage that may occur. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the bigger ones. Each license has its own quirks and stipulations for compliance. So make sure you read the fine print of each license of the license that you pick, so you know how to stay compliant with it. Some licenses include an explicit patent grant to people using the product or project, like the Apache license does this, and some don't. Some have anti-commercial clauses, although this is relatively new, and I don't have a well-known example just yet. And then others stipulate on how any trademarks can be used. Like the Mozilla public license, for example, stipulates that any downstream Projects that are compiling Mozilla or Firefox on their own can't use the Firefox trademarks. So proprietary licenses. This is the license family we're probably most familiar with. A lot of software is distributed under proprietary license. Like if we use Adobe, that's proprietary license. Windows is proprietary license. Parts of Mac OS are under a proprietary license. And with a proprietary license, all rights are reserved by the author and disallow any sort of exploration. They can be applied to anything and can be combined with permissive licenses. They are considered a terminal license. A terminal license is a final license, and no other licenses are applied after a terminal license is applied to whatever. So next thing we have is permissive licenses. Permissive licenses are permissive. They allow large amount of leeway in usage. They can be combined with proprietary and copyleft licenses, and derivatives do not have to be under the same license. So in the scheme of things, they're more of a centrist license. You can go either way with them. When working with sources under a permissive license, respect the author's wishes. It's generally considered bad manners to relicense things released to their permissive license. Projects under a permissive license usually have communities who are happy the way they are and don't want to switch. There have been instances where a project was forked and relicensed under a copyleft license simply because the people behind the fork did not like permissive licenses. The community that happened to was not very happy about that. All right, some permissive licenses we may have heard of. There's the BSD family. There's the MIT expat license, commonly known as the MIT license. The Apache license version 2, ISC license, and the Creative Commons attribution. Next thing, copyleft licenses. Copyleft licenses are probably the most well-known open source licenses. They require any derivatives to be under the same license. So anything under a copyleft license needs to stay under a copyleft license. And so what that means is if you're working with a project that's under a copyleft license and you improve it or you make a derivative of it, then it needs to stay, your derivative will have the same license as the original. Sources under a copyleft license cannot be combined with proprietary licenses or some other copyleft licenses. So yeah, not all copyleft licenses are compatible with each other. They generally forbid additional restrictions to be placed on the source, the code, or whatever is under the license. They are also terminal licenses as well. Simply, because you can't add additional restrictions on it, there is nowhere else to go with that. Some copyleft licenses, there's the GPL, the AGPL, the Mozilla Public License, and the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. This presentation is under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license, so if anyone wants to use this, feel free. All right, public domain. Public domain is free to use without restrictions. This is the preferred license of the US government. So any photos, videos, that sort of thing that we see, those are all public domain. So we can take those and use them however we wish. Some licenses, the public domain license, the Creative Commons 0, and the unlicensed. Although there is some criticism of the unlicensed that it may not be fully compatible and stand up in court. So be aware. All right, open source etiquette. There's an etiquette to working in open source projects. So every project is different, but here are a few guidelines. Read the documentation if it exists. It's documentation is a force multiplier. It frees people up to work on the project rather than answering questions. Documentation should also tell you how to contribute, how to ask for help, or how to open tickets. If there isn't any documentation, that could be a good place to get started. People to write docs are always needed. Check open bug reports before creating a new ticket. Yeah, the problem may be known, or someone may have already run into it. If there is an open ticket which describes the problem, feel free to add anything else to it. If there's a similar ticket to what you're experiencing, but not exactly, ask around the community to see if a new ticket should be opened, or if the existing ticket should be used. Maybe decided that a bug is different enough that it's something unique on its own. Provide as much info as possible in the bug report. All right, steps to recreate the issue are always helpful. No one likes it when they get something on their desk that says, fix this, it's broken. So, and when you're creating the recreation steps, use a fresh install. There could be some sort of weird interaction between things that prohibit the finding of the bug. All right, and check back in on the bug report. Don't abandon it. More information may be needed, or they may ask you to run some different commands. So yeah, so check in on it and see what's going on. All right, follow the contributing guidelines. Most projects should have guidelines on how to contribute to the project. This could be something like small pull requests, descriptive commit messages, squash and rebase or not, or making sure there are tests. The project may be heavily into test-driven development, and they may not accept any contributions without test. Be pleasant and gracious. Most open source communities are filled with volunteers working on the project out of the goodness of their heart, and they don't owe anyone anything. Many open source projects are labors of love created by a few people, and they appreciate it when people thank them for their time and help. This leads into the next thing. Figure out how to give back. Trees don't grow without water, and community-driven open source projects don't grow without people donating time, expertise, equipment, resources, or money. This is especially true for businesses using community-based open source software. Try to figure out how to support the projects that are being used. Infamously, the OpenSSL project was maintained by one person when the Heartbleed vulnerability was found. One person was maintaining it, but it was one of the most widely used cryptography libraries in the world. People are making a lot of money off of this, but they're relying on one person to do the work. And that's kind of what Hacktoberfest is about. It's giving back. All right, some resources that I used. TLDR Legal. I got a lot of information about open source licenses from them. Copyleft.org for information about copyleft licenses. The Open Source Initiative has a collection of information about licenses as well. And then there is a Wikipedia, which is just a good general reference all around. All right, that's the talk. We're at the last slide, and does anyone have any questions or anything they would like to explain?